네, 여러분 안녕하십니까?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2021 Arctic Partnership Week. And now we are ready to start the 10th Arctic Policy Forum. I am Chae Soo-ran, Research Fellow at the KMI. And the Arctic Policy Forum is being held for the 10th time this year, connecting the ROK with the Arctic. It has served as a platform for cooperation and a channel of building a consensus towards finding solutions to Arctic challenges. This year, the Policy Forum is being held with the theme Arctic Policy Connecting the Arctic to the World. Marking the 25th anniversary of the Arctic Council, the Arctic Policy Forum this year will take stock of the achievements, and from different perspectives, we will hear different prospects and outlooks for the forum and the Arctic. And before we start, I would like to introduce our honored guests, gracing us with their presence. We have former Minister of Oceans and Fisheries, Mr. Kim Sung-jin. Director General Song Sang-keun for Marine Policy of the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries. Hello. Next, we have Ambassador Hong Young-gi for Arctic Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Vice President Kim Jong-duk of KMI, who is also the acting president of the KMI. And finally, last but not least, President Kang Ho of COPRI. Thank you and welcome. Due to COVID-19, we've only invited the minimum number of guests offline. I ask for your kind understanding, and we extend our deepest gratitude to all online participants watching on YouTube. And now for the opening address, I would like to invite the organizer of the 10th Arctic Policy Forum, Acting President Kim Jong-duk of the KMI.
있겠습니다. 큰 박수로
Please welcome Dr. Kim with a big round of applause.
네, 안녕하십니까. 지금 소개.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I am Kim Jong-duk, Acting President of Korea Maritime Institute. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to everyone for coming to the 10th Arctic Policy Forum, particularly for the past 10 years. Thank you very much for your interest and support. And we have former Minister Kim Sung-jin of Oceans and Fisheries. Thank you so much for your unswerving support for the past decade. And I would also like to express my appreciation to the distinguished guests, including Song Sang-keun, Director General for Marine Policy of the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, Ambassador Hong Young-gi for Arctic Affairs, and President Kang Ho of COPRI. Thank you very much for being with us. And I would also like to express my gratitude to the experts from home and abroad for their affection and support in the Arctic Partnership Week, as well as our participants joining us online. From the P4G summit held in Seoul last May to the 26th COP meeting of UNFCCC held in the United Kingdom in November, the world's most important keyword for the year was climate change. The world was unanimously called for action and solidarity with the international community before it is too late. The Republic of Korea is also participating in the efforts of the international community to respond to climate change through the 2050 carbon neutral strategy. We're also seeing heightened interest with regard to the Arctic, which is at the forefront of climate change. And this year is a very meaningful year for Korea's Arctic policy. First off, the Polar Activities Promotion Act was enacted to promote integrated polar policies, and the long-awaited plan to construct the next-generation research icebreaker has also been confirmed. In addition, in order to actively respond to the climate crisis in the Arctic and contribute to the sustainable development of the Arctic and utilize the Arctic as a space of new opportunities for mankind, the 2050 Arctic Activities Strategy was also established this year. In that both climate change and the Arctic are issues of future generations, Korea wants to demonstrate in our 2050 strategy that the dream of the Arctic is no different from the dream that we have. distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This year marks the 10th anniversary of the Arctic Policy Forum. So just as there are no borders in the climate crisis, we have been up and running for the past 10 years with the belief that there are no borders in response and cooperation. Throughout the years, the forum has established itself as a discourse for Arctic cooperation where we can respond and ponder together the current issues facing the Arctic across the geographical boundaries of the Arctic and non-Arctic states. This year, the Arctic Policy Forum, taking into account the 25th anniversary of the Arctic Council as well as its 2030 strategy, would like to take the time to examine the cooperation of various Arctic stakeholders, including the Arctic Council, observer states, Arctic's indigenous peoples, and international organizations. In particular, we prepared a keynote speech by the then Canadian Minister of Foreign Affairs who led the Ottawa Declaration in 1996 that enabled the Arctic Council to its being, who is Lloyd Axworthy, in addition to that of the current Russian chair of the South of the Arctic Council, Ambassador Nikolai Korchinov. The future of the Arctic reviewed by KMI is no different, and for the future of the Arctic that we will be building together, we will contribute to support the Arctic policies promoted by the government and conduct international joint research and strengthened cooperation with various stakeholders, including the Arctic Council, through continuous academic events and exchanges. And from the designed view originally set forth for the Arctic Council upon its establishment, it will be a meaningful opportunity to review the 25 years up to the present and to look into the future 25 years from the perspective of the current Arctic Council. We will also prepare a variety of participatory programs to educate the next generation and engage with the public. I would like to ask for your further support and interest in the efforts of all of us that strive to make the Arctic a space that shares the future with mankind. And last but not least, I hope today's 10th Arctic Policy Forum serve as a venue to draw the upcoming future of the Arctic together and gather wisdom to solve the problems the region faces. And I would like to once again extend my gratitude for your support for the past 10 years. MOFA, Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, and all of the experts of the Policy Forum, thank you very much.
네,
Thank you for your wonderful words and your commitment to continue to forge stronger cooperation. Next, I'd like to invite Director General Song Sang-keun for Marine Policy of the MOF for a welcoming speech. Please welcome Mr. Song with a big round of applause. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I am Song Sang-keun, Director General for Marine Policy of the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, MOF. To all participants of the 10th Arctic Policy Forum, I extend my warmest welcome. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge that despite COVID-19, to broaden cooperation in the Arctic, this event has been prepared by Acting Duty President Kim Jong-deok of the KMI and former Minister Kim Sung-jin of Oceans and Fisheries will moderate the panel session. Ambassador Hong Young-gi for Arctic Affairs and President Kang Ho of COPRI, thank you very much. And although we could not be joined in person, Chairman Lloyd Axworthy of the World Refugee and Migration Council, Chair Nikolai Korchinov of the SAO Group of Arctic Council, have sent us their keynote speeches despite their very busy schedules. A sincere thanks to both gentlemen. Also joining us online will be Iceland SAO Ambassador Peter Askerson, AIA Secretary Lisa Mack, PAME Special Advisory Michael Kingston, and Matthew Shupe, Mosaic Coordinator. I thank you, as well as all other presenters and panelists. Distinguished guests, this year marks the 25th anniversary of the Arctic Council, which has played a pivotal role in Arctic cooperation. The Arctic Council commemorated this milestone in May by adopting the very first Arctic Council Strategic Plan 2030, with the goal of environmental protection, sustainable social and economic development, and enhancement and further strengthening of the Arctic Council, wherein the way forward for the Arctic Council was presented. Notably, the strategic plan calls for bolstered status of the Arctic Council through greater engagement of observers in its activities. As such, going forward, observer states are expected to assume greater roles and responsibilities in the Arctic Council. As a responsible observer state, Korea has employed the Araon and the Dasan Research Station to monitor the Arctic marine environment and ecosystem to resolve Arctic challenges. In particular, with the aim to support systematic polar activities, Korea has enacted the Polar Activities Promotion Act this year, and to conduct high-latitude research above 80 degrees north, Korea also finalized the decision to build a next-generation ice-breaking research vessel, IBRV, thereby laying a domestic foundation for Arctic activities. Based on mature domestic conditions and well-established international network of cooperation, the Korean government developed the Arctic Activities Strategy last month to leap into an Arctic governance leader by 2050. Contribution to addressing common challenges, expanding the Arctic diplomatic horizon, developing the Arctic in a sustainable manner, and laying the foundation for Arctic activities, which are the four main pillars of this strategy through which Korea, as a responsible Arctic partner, will continue its endeavors. Ladies and gentlemen, the Arctic Policy Forum is held for the 10th time today. Each year, the forum has addressed a wide range of Arctic issues through in-depth discussions and contributed to forming a new Arctic discourse. Under the topic Arctic Policy Connecting the Arctic to the World, the forum will share the achievements of the Arctic Council of the past 25 years and future visions. In particular, this year, observer states, indigenous people of the Arctic, international organizations, and other key Arctic actors will discuss measures for cooperation. I hope today's discussions invigorate sustainable cooperation between Arctic and non-Arctic states. The MOF will continue to strive to build solid trust between Korea and Arctic states by contributing to the international community through fulfilling the role as an observer state. Last but not least, I wish all polar families joining us online and offline good health and happiness. Thank you.
네, 말씀
Thank you very much for your kind words. Korea, as the observer state of the Arctic Council, he has mentioned that we need to strengthen our roles on that behalf. Thank you very much for your comments. Next, I would like to invite Ambassador Hong Young-gi for Arctic Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
존경하는 내외
Distinguished guests from home and abroad, I am Hong Young-gi, Ambassador for Arctic Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. First of all, let me express my congratulations on hosting the 10th Arctic Policy Forum being held on the second day of Arctic Partnership Week Policy State Track. I would like to express my appreciation to the distinguished guests for joining us despite their busy schedules, including the host, Acting President Kim Jong-deok of KMI, and also Director General Song Sang-geun of MOC, President Kang Ho of COPRI, and also former Minister Kim Sung-jin of Oceans and Fisheries. And thank you all to our participants here today. Today, the 10th Arctic Policy Forum under the theme Arctic Policy Connecting the Arctic to the World seeks to review the achievements and prospects amid the 25th anniversary of the Arctic Council and to discuss the direction and goals of Arctic cooperation towards 2030. In all aspects of international relations, governance, climate, and ecology, the Arctic environment is changing. The influence of international relations of the US, China, and Russia on Arctic governance is gradually increasing, and observers, including states, are expanding their participation in Arctic governance. Our internal capabilities have also changed. The Polar Activities Promotion Act, enacted and put into force this year, laid the foundation to enable us to conduct various polar activities such as scientific research and economic activities in a systematic fashion. In addition, in June of this year, the construction of the next generation research icebreaker passed the preliminary feasibility study. This expansion of the Arctic scientific research infrastructure will not only greatly contribute to our Arctic-related scientific research, but will also lay the groundwork for us to become a leading nation in Arctic research and data. It is a time when strategic responses are needed to keep pace with changes in the Arctic environment at home and abroad. On October 14th, for the first time, for a vice minister took part in the Arctic Circle Assembly held in Iceland, making him the first vice minister to attend the event. And the second vice minister of foreign affairs expressed our will to continue to strengthen cooperation and contribution for the environmental protection and sustainable development of the Arctic Circle, which is a common task for mankind. And in addition, he introduced Arctic-related activities that we have been engaging in to actively contribute to addressing climate change and sustainable development for the Arctic economy. In addition, on November 10th, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs held the 2021 Sustainable Arctic Forum with the participation of government representatives from the US, China, and Russia. In this forum, in commemoration of the 25th anniversary of the Arctic Council, we assess the Arctic Council's past achievements and discuss ways to expand the contribution of observer states such as Korea. All participants agreed on the importance of peaceful cooperation in the Arctic region. This shows that in our response to challenges that threaten human survival, such as the climate crisis, the Arctic region may be capable of becoming a space for international cooperation. And in that aspect, international forums such as the 2021 Sustainable Arctic Forum and today's Arctic Policy Forum are pivotal in building our foundation for joint cooperation. Against the backdrop of economic, security, and environmental changes caused by the melting of the Arctic Circle, the Korean government announced the 2050 Arctic Activities Strategy. Our new move must contribute to the sustainable development of the Arctic and the common good of mankind, while at the same time being able to connect the efforts to lead to the development of national interests. As a responsible member of the international community, while actively responding to Arctic issues such as climate change, strengthening substantive cooperation in areas such as the NSR and eco-friendly energy sources will greatly contribute to raising public awareness regarding our Arctic activities. And in that aspect, the importance of the Arctic Partnership Week, which marks the 6th anniversary this year, is paramount. The APW is an active communication platform for Arctic experts at home and abroad, as well as the general public, and is an important forum for discussions to achieve the Arctic Sustainable Development Goals. Lastly, I hope we can gather and muster the insights and wisdom of many at today's Arctic Policy Forum celebrating its 10th anniversary, and I truly hope that today's productive discussion will contribute to realizing our vision to becoming a leading country in polar affairs. Thank you.
네, 의미 있는
Thank you for the very wonderful and significant words of congratulation. And last, I'd like to invite President Kang Ho of COPRI for congratulatory remarks. Please give another welcoming hand.
예, 안녕.
Good day. I am Kang Ho, President of COPRI. First of all, despite the challenges of COVID-19, the 10th Arctic Policy Forum has been made possible by Acting President Kim Jong-duk of KMI and all staff members. Thank you very much for your hard work. I would also like to thank Director General Song Sang-gun of Marine Policy of the MOF, Ambassador Hong Young-gi for Arctic Affairs of MOFA, and Mr. Kim Hong-seo, President of KIOST, Seo Jang-wook, Honorable former Minister Kim Sung-jin of Oceans and Fisheries will moderate the panel session. The year 2021 will be remembered as a symbolic year in Korea's Arctic research. This April, the government enacted the Polar Activities Promotion Act, which entered into effect in October. In June, in particular, the Next Generation IBRV building project passed the preliminary feasibility study and is ready to kick off in earnest next year, with around 277.4 billion won. The main purpose of the Polar Activities Promotion Act is to expand the basis of the Act on Activities in the Antarctic Area and the Protection of Antarctic Environment, which supports Antarctic activities, to include Arctic activities by providing a legislative and policy basis. The next generation IBRV, from its very outset of shipbuilding planning, has been targeted to address Arctic issues. In Korea's Arctic research, the regional scope and research horizon, as well as the national status in the Arctic, are about to make a new leap forward. In addition, the MOF established the 2050 Arctic Activities Strategy, which presented a clear strategic direction of Korea looking into the future. Korea has thus secured a new legislative policy basis and cutting-edge research infrastructure for Arctic research. On this basis, the direction in which Korea will pursue research and with what strategy and goal Korea will expand cooperation with Arctic states to enlarge its role in the Arctic are essential discussions in setting the strategic goal and achieving the strategic goals for the Arctic in Korea. In broadening Korea's Arctic activities, the year 2021 will serve as a major turning point, which is why the 10th Arctic Policy Forum will be an even more significant platform in facilitating cooperation, communication, and discussion with the Arctic and presenting policy directions that will lead Korea's Arctic activities. As the president of COPRI, which leads Korea's Arctic scientific research, I will strive to ensure that today's discussions on the outlook for Arctic cooperation serves not only Korean Arctic research, but IBRV-driven new Arctic solutions by setting the direction for research and science diplomacy that contribute to resolving Arctic issues. Once again, I would like to thank Acting President Kim Jong-duk of the KMI and all the staff for preparing this event, as well as presenters and panelists. I hope today's discussions on policies and cooperation carry greater significance as we expand our horizon of new Arctic activities. COPRI and I will join you in this journey. Thank you.
네, 북극해
Yes, the meaning of the Arctic Policy Forum and the contribution was reminded to us by President Kang Ho. Thank you. And this is the end of the opening ceremony of the 10th Arctic Policy Forum. We will move right on to session 1 for the two keynote speeches. The keynote speech this year marking the 25th anniversary of the Arctic Council. We would like to present and look back on the beginning of the Arctic Council and also look into the future vision of Arctic Council. We have two speakers. The first speaker is Mr. Lloyd Axworthy, Chairman of the World Refugee and Migration Council. And we have this keynote speech in video. In 1996, during the Ottawa Declaration, as the Foreign Minister of Canada, Mr. Axworthy contributed to establishing the Arctic Council, and here is the video.
I'm very privileged to join you in your conference, although I'm about 6,000, 7,000 kilometers away. It's good that we're talking about the Arctic because my city of Winnipeg, which is probably the coldest city on the globe, is experiencing one of those wonderful things we call Arctic blasts. So we're always very interested in what goes on there. There was an important headline in the newspapers here in Canada yesterday. It said that the situation in the Arctic can be summed up with 4 words: more rain, less snow. To me, that's probably one of the strongest messages about the transformation that's taking place in the circumpolar Arctic region, of which my own country of Canada has a very big stake and a very large part of the real estate. And it happens at a time, which is important to note, that in the next year, which we're only a month away, will be the 25th anniversary of the Arctic Council. I go back to those old days as foreign minister. That was one of our major initiatives. And just as a matter of sort of a historical factoid, the present Governor General of Canada, Mary Simon, was our circumpolar ambassador at the time and worked very actively and significantly to initiate the Arctic Council as a brand new, innovative, multilateral institution on a regional basis to handle the issues of the Arctic. What I want to say today is really that I think the Council still has to be the basic touchstone framework for any new alteration in the architecture. But there has to be an alteration because conditions are so different. And the kind of dynamic pressures on the Arctic and its people are becoming even more sort of heavy and onerous and challenging. Let me just give you a few examples, which I'm sure you know. The impact of climate can be seen in virtually every dimension of life in the Arctic North. The permafrost is melting. That means that the infrastructure is buckling. It also means that the permafrost melt is releasing new methane gases that only add to the problem of the carbon cloud we live under. And it's increasingly of concern to a number of scientists that not only is it releasing methane, but there are a number of toxics, viruses that have been permanently frozen for thousands of years, which now may be released into the Arctic food chain, may be released into the air, but anyway, in this time when we're so sensitive to public health issues, it's going to be really important that these things be monitored. We also have an increasing acceleration of resource development and extraction. When we first started the Council back in 1997, it was a promise of a rich trove of resources. Those resources are now being tapped quite actively. And perhaps what is also very concerning is the increasing pressure to begin incorporating the Arctic area into a part of the ongoing great power, sort of who's the biggest bully on the block syndrome. In other words, a competition over security. And I recall very well sitting down in the Swedish northern city of Luleå with Jeff Talbot, who was then the Undersecretary of State. And we agreed over breakfast, very early breakfast, that security would not be under the purview of the Council because we didn't want it to become part of a kind of network of what was then still a lot of competition going on between Russia and the United States. Well, that security situation has changed. To begin with, increasingly, it's not just a matter of military security, it's almost a question of human security, the threat of the climate, of disease. What is important is that the Arctic Council is going to have to revisit the issue of security and hammer out something that's totally in keeping with the basic premises that began the Council. And I think that it's really important that we just remember what those are. First, that the core group are the 8 circumpolar countries and their governments. But one of the innovations of the Council close to 25 years ago was to incorporate indigenous sort of stakeholders, founding organizations as they're called. And they are still full members around the table. And because decision-making at the Council is consensual, their voice is strongly heard. As a result, over the years, I mean, the Council initiated the first major sort of study and examination of climate impacts on the Arctic. It's undertaking major reviews of social conditions, education, and sort of social programs for Arctic indigenous people. Some very important technical things, looking at search and rescue, cooperation, collaboration with Coast Guards, collaboration on rules of regulation about extraction. But as we see happening in so many other parts of our life, the existential imperative demand overtakes the institutions and the procedures. And I think that's why it's very important that the Council use this year, this time, in conferences like this to start discussing what should be the new mandate, the revisit mandate of the Council itself. Because without an effective governance system, the Arctic will become a Wild West show. And everybody, every country, every extractor looking out for themselves. And so that basic underlying cooperative premise is certainly something that's really important. And it should be based upon the idea that there will still be a core group of indigenous people and governments, but we also have to recognize that the growing interest of so many countries, I think the last number of observer countries is well over 25 people, governments. So in a way, the Arctic Council is often a very interesting case study for the world of politics in terms of it's been transformed into environmental security. It's given new non-state actors a right of participation. And it's also beginning to change the notion of sovereignty where countries are prepared to sort of provide some restraints and guardrails, at least in that region. That has to be strongly and forthrightly protected because once it changes, then I think we're in for a real sort of Arctic becoming a hotspot. Let me also say that one of the things that we need to consider is how do we expand the activity of the Council to take into account the new security questions. How does it relate to things like migration? How does it relate to the whole issue of the changing species, orca sharks now eating up the foodstuffs in the Churchill Basin, things of that kind. Dramatic, very unsettling changes. But we have to find the right ways of adapting and making sure that Arctic people are very much involved and that there's a decentralization of many decisions so that local authorities, things like we set up in Canada, the Iqaluit is available. And at the same time, I think we have to provide for a different kind of forum by which non-Arctic countries can become involved. Not just as observers, but I think as a model what ASEAN would have of ASEAN +5. But I think there has to be an Arctic Council plus X number in order to provide that fulfillment. And that's why I think it's really be important that I want to raise this proposition for you to discuss, that the Russian chair be given strong recommendations to begin looking at a different set of mandates for the Arctic Council, to give governments a better capacity to respond, and to ensure that the Arctic people themselves are considered to be first and foremost in terms of priority. That's a big task, but if it begins, then next year's celebration of the 25th anniversary can be the time in which the Arctic Council can be renewed and refreshed and redirected. So I hope in the discussions you have that the governance of the Arctic and the increasing importance of a reform of the Arctic Council be on your agenda. Thank you very much for listening and have a good meeting.
네, 발표 잘 들었습니다. 네, 25년 전에 이 북극 이사회를 설립하신 역사의 주인공을 우리는 만나봤습니다. 자, 이어서 두 번째 기조 연사도 동영상으로 준비가 되어 있는데요. 니콜라이 크루츠노프 북극 이사회 고위 관리회 사오 의장님이십니다. 북극 이사회 25년의 성과와 또 러시아 의장국의 비전이라는 주제로 연설을 해 주시겠는데요. 러시아로 말씀을 해 주십니다. 동시 통역을 저희가 제공하고 있는데요. 동시
Simultaneous
통역기를
interpretation. So please use the receivers for interpretation.
Dear distinguished guests, Arctic colleagues and friends, we are coming to an end of a special year in Arctic operations. This year, the Arctic Council is celebrating 25 years of exceptional Arctic operation. For a quarter of a century, despite the complexity of global affairs in other areas, the 8 Arctic states and Arctic indigenous peoples have sat together at the same table working towards achieving our shared Arctic goals. Through the Arctic Council, strong partnerships have formed between Arctic nations and peoples. This is due to the unique structure of the Council, which is the first and only intergovernmental forum where indigenous peoples sit at the same table as states as permanent participants. As climate change rapidly impacts the Arctic, warming the region 3 times faster than the rest of the world, the Council's work is increasingly important to develop a positive agenda and coordinate joint action to secure a prosperous future for all inhabitants. The Arctic Council has 6 working groups that carry out the Council's project and address a broad range of the Arctic's most pressing issues. They regularly develop world-class environmental, ecological, and social assessments that supply us with the best scientific knowledge that inform our decision-making. Many of the challenges we face in the Arctic are global in nature. Therefore, global cooperation is of high importance. The Council currently has 38 observers that provide important contributions to our work. Many of our most ambitious goals could not be reached without the efforts of the observer states and their commitment to international agreements, including the Paris Agreement. Their understanding that Arctic change impacts their people and that their actions impact Arctic inhabitants is indispensable for securing a sustainable future for the Arctic that will benefit us all. This work, facilitated through the Arctic Council, has significance not only in the High North, but also globally. The Council's work has contributed to international treaties and conventions, including the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, the Minamata Convention on Mercury, the International Maritime Organization's Polar Code, and others. Over the last 25 years, as global interest in and pressure on the Arctic region has grown, Arctic cooperation has strengthened. 3 important legally binding agreements among the Arctic states have negotiated under the auspices of the Council related to search and rescue, oil pollution, and scientific cooperation. These agreements demonstrate our sincere commitment to align on joint action and coordination. During this anniversary year, Russia assumed the Arctic Council chairmanship. We choose to operate under the theme Responsible Governance for a Sustainable Arctic, reflecting the need for collective action on the sustainable development of the region and to strengthen synergies with other regional platforms. Under that theme, we have 4 main priorities. Our first priority is well-being of Arctic peoples. We will focus on maintaining the resilience and vitality of the people of the North, promote climate adaptation measures, support youth and regional cooperation development, and improve the health, well-being, education, and quality of life for all Arctic inhabitants. We are also working to preserve the linguistic and cultural heritage of Arctic indigenous peoples in line with the UN's International Decade of the World's Indigenous Peoples. Climate change has a significant, rapid impact on the Arctic environment. Our chairmanship's second priority is therefore environmental protection. In addition to addressing climate change issues and adapting livelihoods, we need to give urgent attention to managing environmental risks. The Russian chairmanship will pay particular attention to coordinated measures to protect, preserve, and restore the Arctic environment, research climatic conditions, and strengthen environmental security, including preventing natural and man-made environmental emergencies. One of the main conditions for ensuring the well-being and prosperity of the Arctic is sustainable economic development. This is the third priority of the Russian chairmanship, and it is an important component of the sustainable development of the region. The chairmanship focuses on promoting economic cooperation, including the development of energy infrastructure, transport routes, and telecommunication, as well as improving investment, business, and entrepreneurship opportunities in the Arctic. The final focus of the Russian chairmanship will be to strengthen the Arctic Council. The Council recently adopted its first ever 10-year strategic plan, which reflects the shared values and joint aspirations of the Arctic states and indigenous permanent participants. The strategic plan will serve as a launch pad for the next decade as we advance sustainable development and environmental protection in the region. And the Russian chairmanship will prioritize putting it into action. Most importantly, during the course of our Arctic Council chairmanship and in spirit of the Council's 25th anniversary, we will continue to foster constructive cooperation, maintain peace and stability, and ensure responsible governance for a sustainable Arctic. Thank you.
네, 큰 박수 다시.
Yes, please give another big round of applause to our keynote speaker on the topic of the implication of Arctic Council to Arctic cooperation and the achievements of 25 years of Arctic Council and the vision of the Russian chairmanship was presented. And now, this is the end of the keynote speech, and we will, after a short break, we will see you for session 1 back here at 2:30.
네, 제 10회 북극계
The Arctic Policy Forum, 10th Arctic Policy Forum. Welcome back, everyone, to the 10th Arctic Policy Forum, and we will kick off session 2 with the topic Arctic Cooperation 2030. We have a total of 4 presenters. This forum is live streamed on YouTube. Once again, please join us online until the very end of the forum. And to ask for your kind understanding, we originally had 5 presenters. However, Secretary Lisa Mack of AIA unfortunately could not join us this afternoon. We had allocated 10 minutes for each presentation, but I would like to give each presenter about 12 to 13 minutes if you like, and you can use the additional time to add comments. The first presentation is on the topic of Arctic Council Strategy 2030. We have SAO Ambassador Peter Assergarsson of Iceland joining us online from Iceland. Mr. Ambassador, are you there? Are you ready to start your presentation?
네, 자 그러면은
Yes, if you're ready, please start your presentation.
Good morning, dear friends of the Arctic, ladies and gentlemen. I send you greetings from Iceland, where we are now rapidly getting closer to the shortest day of the year, On December 21st, we will only have about 4 hours of daylight every day, and thus it is not so unusual for me to be addressing you here long before daybreak. It is an honor, and I am grateful to the Polar Policy Research Center and the Korea Maritime Institute for the opportunity to be here with you, albeit virtually. For the past 25 years, the Arctic Council has provided the primary platform for addressing international issues in the Arctic region. It has, from the beginning, proved to be the most important circumpolar forum for the Arctic nations, the permanent participants as representatives of the Arctic indigenous peoples, and the growing number of observers. It is a matter of pride for Iceland that at the end of our chairmanship of the Arctic Council in May this year, the Arctic states agreed on the adoption of a 10-year strategic plan for the Council. This was adopted at the ministerial meeting in Reykjavik in May this year. And to briefly quote the strategic plan, I quote, the strategic plan reflects the shared and joint aspirations of the Arctic states and the permanent participants to advance sustainable development, environmental protection, and good governance in the Arctic. One of the reasons for the strategic plan's importance is that it provides the Council with a long-term guidance that goes beyond the usual 2-year chairmanship cycle. This is the first strategic plan for the Arctic Council, and it has the potential to focus and improve the execution of the Council's long-term goals. The plan sets forth 7 main goals in the following categories: Arctic climate, healthy and resilient Arctic ecosystems, healthy Arctic marine environment, sustainable social development, knowledge and communications, and finally, a stronger Arctic Council. These main goals are then supplemented by 49 action plans. The strategic vision for the Arctic and the Arctic Council for the year 2030 that was adopted at the Reykjavik Ministerial envisions that the Arctic will remain a region of peace, stability, constructive cooperation, and that it will remain a vibrant, prosperous, sustainable, and secure home for its inhabitants, including indigenous peoples, and where their rights and well-being are respected. It is further stated that the Arctic will be a region where it is firmly established that healthy ecosystems and habitats are of critical importance, and the uniqueness and fragility of the Arctic environment is respected by all in the region and beyond. It is the vision of the Arctic states that all the people in the Arctic will have ample pathways for sustainable social and economic development while respecting the environment. Conservation and sustainable use of natural resources in the Arctic that respect the rights and cultures of all Arctic inhabitants will contribute to resilient societies. The particular vulnerability of the Arctic to the rapid warming of the region will continue to be widely acknowledged globally and be a critical driver for the Council's activities. Furthermore, Arctic states will continue to make the voice of the Arctic heard at multilateral fora that address climate issues, drawing attention to and urging the international community to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. The Arctic states further decided that the Arctic Council will remain the leading intergovernmental forum for the Arctic cooperation as it continues to advance knowledge, understanding, and action on issues of critical importance to the region and continue to support the strong legal framework that applies to the region. The Council will contribute effectively to social and economic development, climate change mitigation, and adaptation towards low-emission societies and environmental protection throughout the Arctic. The Arctic Council will have further developed its working methods and structures, including the cooperation with observers and other partners to respond to new realities, opportunities, and increased international attention to its work. I will end there, but urge you to find the full text of the Arctic Council strategic plan and indeed the Reykjavik Ministerial Declaration at the homepage of the Arctic Council at arcticcouncil.org. I thank you again for the honor of being invited to address you and wish all of you a useful and productive time at the 10th Arctic Policy Forum. Thank you very much.
네, 큰 박수 부탁드릴게요.
Yes, please give a big round of applause to Ambassador, our guest of Iceland's now Ambassador.
김민수 실장님께서 준비를 하고 계신
Next, I would like to invite Mr. Kim Min-soo from KMI. As we rearrange this stage, please bear with us for just a moment. After the four presentations, we will be engaging in a Q&A session, and currently the session is being broadcast live online. And I know that we have many online participants joining us, and you may have many questions and comments for our speakers. So please use the chat box, and we will make sure to refer to your questions and comments during the Q&A session. So then let me now invite Mr. Kim Min-soo from KMI for his remarks.
네, 안녕하십니까.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor to speak before you, and thank you and welcome. The topic of my presentation is Arctic cooperation of observer states of the Arctic Council. In terms of the contents of my presentation, I would like to first talk about the observer states at the Arctic Council, the observer status, and also the necessity of expanding the role of the observer state, and a new important momentum or milestone in Korea's Arctic cooperation in 2021. So I would like to offer you with some background on that, and I do have a couple of suggestions that I would like to offer. First is an overview on the observer status in the Arctic Council. The Principle 37 and Paragraph 37 and 38 of the Rules of Procedure integrates the key aspects of the status of the observer state. So you can see that Article or Principle 37 of the Arctic Council allows observers to participate in the Arctic Council meetings and activities within the Arctic Council and to maintain the status of the Arctic Council. The consensus of the ministers of the 8 Arctic Council members is required. The observers can, of course, observe what's being done in terms of the proceedings. And the observer can submit their views or issues through statements and documents and can offer their views in that process. And not only that, the observers can take part in working groups. And even if you do take part in such working groups, the financial contributions of the observer states cannot exceed the financing or the financial contributions of Arctic countries to any given project. And if you refer to the relevant Annex 2, there is a ministerial meeting that takes place every 2 years. And every 2 years, there's a change in chairmanship of the Arctic Council. And no later than 120 days prior to the Arctic Ministerial Meeting, the observers need to submit their report on their activities. And every 4 years from the date of being granted the observer status, you need to express affirmatively your intent and will to maintain the observer status. But as you've heard in the presentation, the Arctic Council has put together a strategic plan for 2030. And Director General Song Sang-keun has also emphasized this point, where the core aspects of the strategic plan is observer and other partners, and to extend and strengthen the cooperation of the Arctic Council with these observer states and these partners. And if you look at the strategy clause 7.6, in order to develop and the cooperation with observers, it mentions that it will enhance constructive, balanced, and meaningful observer engagement. So in the run-up to 2030, to strengthen the prominence of the Arctic Council, they intend to also enhance the role of observers, and that's indicated in their strategy for 2030. So then, why do we need to expand the role of the observer state? I think I can elaborate with 2 perspectives. First is with regard to the global Arctic. What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. And the Arctic and the non-Arctic are increasingly becoming interconnected. And there are 4 examples that I can cite. One is on marine debris and marine litter. So can we say that the debris and litter that we see in the north is something that has been generated from the north? It actually comes from the North Pacific and the North Atlantic Oceans, gathering and accumulating in the Arctic Circle. And also, when the Greenland ice sheet melts, then we will be seeing a sea level rise of close to 7 meters, according to my knowledge. That means that all of our coastal states will be flooded and inundated. And due to the effects of the climate change in the Arctic, we are seeing the impacts in the mid-latitude regions and floods as well as droughts. And here, what you see are the flyways of the migratory birds. So we're seeing that the ecosystem is being connected and if you see this example, this is quite clear that the ecosystems are also connected. Next is on the will and determination of the observer states and the fact that we're seeing enhanced capabilities of the non-Arctic state to contribute to the Arctic Circle. So based on the enhanced will and capabilities, It would be important to decrease or reduce the knowledge gap and share best practices. And based on that, we need to respond to the Arctic issues. And I believe that in the process, we can maximize the capabilities of both the Arctic and the non-Arctic regions. Let me give you a couple of examples. Mosaic is a program that will be presented by our speaker afterwards, but it's led by Germany, where the Arctic and the non-Arctic states, I remember the exact number of people, but approximately 200 scientists for a year has conducted a scientific research based on non-motorized vessels. And the Guggenheim partners have predicted that the overall value of Arctic is more than 1 trillion. And as you know, Japan and China are actively involved in investing in infrastructure in the Arctic. And next has to do with the CAO IUU prevention regulations. Other than the Arctic Circle countries, we have EU, Iceland, and Korea, Japan, and China, where they're looking into some of the commercial fishery possibilities and how that can impact the environment. So based on scientific research, these countries are trying to protect the CAO and trying to promote sustainable activities. So this agreement has been brought together by the states. And also in terms of education, if we think about next generation education, this is not just for the Arctic, but also for the non-Arctic. In other words, it's a common task for mankind. So in these 4 areas, as I have already mentioned, the observer states to have the capabilities as well as the will and determination to contribute to the Arctic Circle, and I think that there could be more to come in the future. In 2021, as you are all very well aware, Korea acquired the observer status in 2013. So as the observer state of the Arctic Council, we've been trying to contribute as much as possible. And I think that there's a lot that we can do going forward. And there are particularly 3 core areas that we have been able to strengthen our foundation. So first is the Polar Activities Promotion Act. Article 12 indicates international activities. And if you look at that, it indicates information exchange, technological cooperation, joint survey, as well as research. And it's about expanding the cooperation based on these pillars. So this act is about the pan-government will and determination of the government, of the Korean government, to contribute to the Arctic Circle. And the second important event was the plan to build the next generation icebreaker research vessel. This has been finalized. The Arahon was built in 2020 and 2010, and based on the 10 years achievements, we were able to become an observer state of the Arctic Council. I believe that this has played a pivotal role. So what we want to do is now bring about the next generation icebreaker research vessel. The icebreaking capacity will be improved from 1 meter to 1.5 meters and 15,000 tons, and the possible research period would be much more extended than our existing research icebreaker. Not only that, Korea has established a 2015 Arctic Activities Strategy. And Korea has some key cooperative goals in place. First, we want to promote tailored bilateral cooperation. And in order to solve the pending issues of the Arctic, we also want to strengthen multilateral cooperation. And not only that, if you refer to this strategy, it also has to do with strengthening domestic Arctic cooperation capabilities. So let me now move on to a couple of suggestions. So then, the role of the Arctic Council, how should that role be strengthened going forward? I believe that this is something that should be done by both the Arctic Council and the observer state, and I think that it can be divided into 2 terms, both qualitative and quantitative. So first, on what the Arctic Council should do, if we take the quantitative perspective, I think that it's important to strengthen the principle of openness. And this principle of openness should be based on a well-proven procedure to verify whether certain states can acquire the observer status. And I also want to mention that the working group, the total 6 working groups within the Arctic Council are carried out according to key characteristics of these individual groups. So I believe that it's important to create a customized manual for each working group so that we can invite more participation of the observers. As you know, the observers also have their own sets of interests and priorities, and I think that the working group also needs to put together a customized manual that would befit the needs of that individual working group. And I believe that the Arctic Circle also needs to take into account some of the regional and sectoral aspects. Let me give you an example. If you look at the sea ice, and the melt of that, and just with the melting of the ice sheets doesn't mean that it will automatically lead to a rise in sea levels. But I think that South Pacific Island nations can also be an observer state if we think about the interconnectedness. So once again, I believe that it would be important to open the doors to other states that may have any relevance with the Arctic Circle. And there are 2 aspects I would like to mention in terms of qualitative terms. The Arctic Council, I believe, works on a project-based approach. So, I believe it is important to provide more opportunities for project-based practical participation of the observer states. And as I've already mentioned, in terms of the financial contributions, the minimum standard is to make sure that the observers' financial contribution should not be more than that of the members of the Arctic Council. But let's say that there is a joint project with the member states. Maybe we can put an exception to the rule. So when it comes to financial contributions, I think that a flexible approach can actually be quite beneficial. And I do know that the Arctic Council has some financial or funding related challenges, and I think that we can actually resolve that as well in the process. And then what should the observer states do going forward? In the Annex 2 of the Rules of Procedure, Annex 2, there are the key observer admission criteria that is stipulated. So, of course, the observer states need to adhere to these admission criteria. And it's also important for the observers to accumulate their achievements. I've mentioned that we've been granted the observer state in 2013. But what we did was actually establish our Dasan Station in 2002. We've built the Araon in 2009, and this policy forum is also witnessing its 10th anniversary. And there are also many examples that I can cite in terms of our activities. So I think that the observer states need to continue on to accumulate these achievements and to make sure that it's recognized by the Arctic Council. And in terms of a qualitative growth, I want to mention that it's important to put together a unified cooperation platform among the observer states to strengthen cooperation. And based on that, some research exchange can be done based on this platform. And I also believe that the states need to strengthen their domestic capabilities to forge external cooperation. And this will help us strengthen the role played by the Arctic Council. So I do recall that yesterday we had the 5 observer states, including Korea, and we discussed the importance of how we can strengthen the observer states' role. So let me just summarize that discussion. China said that the openness should be all the more strengthened for the Arctic Council, and that the Mosaic project and other international research projects should be carried out further. France has indicated that all of the working groups have different modes of operation. And in terms of decision making, the observer's role may be a bit too minimized. So what can be necessary is international cooperation, but also in terms of decision making, in terms of bilateral, multilateral aspects to strengthen decision-making process. Japan has mentioned that dialogue amongst experts would be key and that such efforts should be sustained. For instance, U-Arctic is one example. U-Arctic has many key projects, so he mentioned the importance of such projects. And last but not least, Poland. It mentioned that in order to strengthen the role of the observer states, talked about the facilitation of the projects of the 6 working groups and also the marine debris issue as indicated by UNEP. He's mentioned that we need to expand our horizon into all of these international challenges. And with that, let me conclude. Thank you very much.
네, 북구
Yes, with the topic Arctic cooperation of the Arctic Observer States, Mr. Min-soo Kim of KMI gave us a presentation. The next presenter originally planned was Ms. Lisa Mack, AIA Secretary, but we could not have Ms. Mack. But thanks to Mr. Kim, who used twice the given time, we are now back on time. Please give another big round of applause to Mr. Kim. And the next presenter is Mr. Matthew Shoup of NOAA, who is a NOAA scientist and the coordinator for the Mosaic project. The topic is the Mosaic project. Mr. Shoup, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
예, 말씀 들리시면
Thank
이제
you very
준비한
Yes, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here to present Mosaic to you all. We've just heard a little bit about Mosaic, and I'll give this as a nice example of some international coordination and collaboration in doing some fantastic science in the changing Arctic system. So Mosaic stands for the Multidisciplinary Drifting Observatory for the Study of Arctic Climate. And I'll take you on a little journey, our Mosaic journey across the Arctic, to look at some of the things that we studied out there in the changing Arctic system. Again, I'm Matthew Shoup. I come from the University of Colorado and NOAA in the US. So I want to start with a little bit of background on why we might go into the Arctic to study the Arctic system. Importantly, the Arctic is changing. It's changing so rapidly. Of course, sea ice is declining. There's amplified warming in the Arctic relative to the rest of the globe. The ecosystem is changing. There are so many aspects of change in the Arctic system that are important for us. And as the Arctic is changing, there are a lot of emerging operational and management needs in the Arctic. Things like cargo shipments through the Arctic, managing resources, resource exploration, tourism, so many others. And so we really have this increasing need to be able to operate in the Arctic and to predict and forecast the Arctic with our models. And right now we actually have, I would say, fairly poor model predictive capabilities in the Arctic. And that's in large part because we don't have this complete understanding of the system there, of all the pieces of the system and how they work together. Also importantly, as the Arctic changes, there are a lot of questions coming about regarding the links between that changing Arctic and the rest of the global system in terms of circulation patterns, effects on precipitation, and other aspects that influence us where we live at lower latitudes. And finally, we have so few observations of the Arctic system. It's hard to get there, especially in the wintertime. And so without those observations, it's hard for us to understand the Arctic system. So all of these different reasons were driving us as an international community to want to go to the Arctic, to understand the Arctic, to study the Arctic. And so as a collective international body, we started to put together ideas for an expedition into the Arctic, a scientific expedition. This took about 12 years in the planning through groups like the International Arctic Science Committee and other international groups. This international aspect was so important in the process. But it was also an interdisciplinary process. We wanted to bring together scientists from across a wide variety of disciplines, looking at the atmosphere, looking at the sea ice, looking at the ocean, and from the physical, the biological, the chemical perspectives. we really wanted to bring a multi-scale approach that blended a very detailed focus at small scales with what we call a model grid cell scale. So this is the kind of scale represented by models, but then also a pan-Arctic scale that links with a lot of the international observing networks across the Arctic and other activities going on with satellites, with other ships in the Arctic to really build this pan-Arctic perspective. And integrating observations and models was really important to us as we started to build our concept for this scientific expedition. In the end, we need to improve our models. That's a really important objective. And so we used the model needs to help design the objectives for our field research during this expedition out into the Central Arctic. And the last key point I mentioned here is the annual cycle. So often we go into the Arctic system in the summertime because that's the easy time to get there. It's light, there's not as much ice, and so we can go there with somewhat more ease than in the wintertime. But it's so important to also be there in the winter to understand all seasons and how they impact the Arctic sea ice, the Arctic ecosystem, and other aspects. And so these were some of our basic concepts for a plan for an expedition into the Arctic. And the overarching scientific goals were first to understand the causes and consequences of diminished Arctic sea ice. So why is the sea ice in decline? What are the processes involved in that decline? What's forcing that change? But then also importantly, how does that change feedback on the system itself? How does it affect the biology in the Arctic Ocean or other aspects of the Earth's climate system? Our second objective was to really study some of the cross-disciplinary interactions in the Arctic, right? These linkages between, for example, what happens in the atmosphere with what's happening in the ocean, or how does sunlight affect the biology? Many other cross-cutting questions that we really wanted to address. And thirdly was to improve our model predictive capabilities, right? In the end, we're out there to gain knowledge about the system so we can build that into our models that can then tell us about how we might forecast sea ice or how we might predict the changing Arctic system moving forward and its interactions with the rest of the global system. And also importantly here, these goals were shared by all partners, right? We had so many different international partners coming to the table to help design this expedition, and I'll summarize that a little bit later, the number of different nations involved. But importantly, with these primary goals, we identified the synergy. We identified the areas where we had these shared interests and shared visions, and I think that really enabled us to actually conduct this expedition. So the general concept and plan was to take the German research icebreaker Polarstern and freeze it into the Arctic sea ice for a year as a drifting platform for science, and to install all kinds of equipment around that icebreaker out in the sea ice. And then over the course of the year, extending from September of 2019 through the following September of 2020, drifting with the sea ice across the Central Arctic. Over the course of the year, we would have research aircraft flying around to provide some additional perspectives from the air, and a number of different icebreakers coming in to provide crew rotations, to bring supplies, to bring fuel, and to enable more science. And these were coming from many different international partners. So this is the general concept going in. And now I'd like to take you on a bit of a journey just with some pictures to see the kinds of things that happened on this expedition across the Arctic. We start with, here's the Polarstern as it starts to embark into the Arctic sea ice, out there in search of an ice floe for us to park the ship next to and drift with for the rest of the year. Here's a very nice picture of Polarstern in the ice. You can see that it's starting to get a little bit dark, and indeed, shortly after we arrived there, the polar night set in, and it became very dark for quite a number of months. Another fantastic picture we see here a lot of cracks around the ship, cracks in the ice. And this is part of the Arctic. This is how the ice behaves. It cracks, it deforms, it forms ridges, and these cracks are actually an important part of the Arctic in general, but also an important part of Arctic change. And so we were embedded right in the middle of this very dynamic ice pack. Here's a nice little map showing our drifting journey across the central Arctic. And so we're looking down here on the North Pole, and these different colored lines are the drifting trajectory. And we see on the 4th of October, we started the drift, and then we proceeded across what is called the transpolar drift. And this was a drift track that was kind of first discovered by Fridtjof Nansen about 125 years ago. And it was a drift trajectory that we intended to follow across the Arctic, passively flowing with the sea ice as it moved. Now, on our year, we went a lot faster than Fridtjof Nansen did 125 years ago. And actually, in well less than a year, we arrived all the way across the Arctic in the Fram Strait. And we weren't ready to go home yet. We actually wanted to stay there for a full year, so we actually took the polar stern and went back up near the North Pole to finish out the drift here with this last little purple section to finish out the full year in the Arctic, because being there for a full year was really important for us. So this was our drift trajectory across the central Arctic over this year. And I'm going to go into a few more pictures here just to show some of the international flavors of the science we were doing out there, and you can kind of get a feel for the different kinds of participants involved. We worked together really extraordinarily. This really made the mission possible, was all these different contributions from different nations and institutions out there working together in teams. And really the teams were comprised of many different nations working together on our shared scientific priorities to establish things like our camps. You can see in the background, there's the polar stern. These are setting up camps out on the sea ice around the ship. And you can see it's getting quite dark already in some of these pictures. We set up all kinds of buoys and remote stations that were away from the ship to provide some spatial perspective on the Arctic system. We had all kinds of measurement strategies, sampling things like the snow, like in this picture, the sea ice, ocean water, air samples, all kinds of different samples. And we had to conduct some pretty creative field work. And this really took expertise from many different nations, right? We brought these Arctic experts all together. They had a variety of experiences that could really come to bear and help to support a successful expedition, operating in very challenging environments, like here, this picture from the middle of the melt season when there's a lot of meltwater around. I think this is a great picture of doing some ice coring, and in looking at the people here, who I know most of them personally, I think there are 5 different nations represented by this group of people that are all working together. Just another great example of this teamwork. And again, another international team walking around the ice. We were measuring all aspects of the sea ice, how its thickness is changing as the season progresses, how do melt ponds form on top of the sea ice, and so many other properties of that ice. Here's a gentleman looking at the reflectance. You can imagine that's a really important property, is how much sunlight is reflected off of the ice or off of the liquid water here. A couple of the other fantastic pictures of people working, looking at the ocean. In the background, the people are flying drones into the atmosphere to look at the atmosphere and how the ocean and atmosphere interact. And observing in the new Arctic is a challenge. We had to bring a variety of perspectives here, using helicopters to help distribute some of our assets out on the sea ice. And this is a picture I really enjoy of a couple people measuring a melt pond as it's starting to freeze over and starting to return back into the freeze-up season. And then one last picture here is a really nice display of the international flavor. You see all the flags in the background of all the different nations involved in this mosaic expedition and all the different people there. This was for one portion of this mission, one out of our 5 legs. And these are all the scientists and the ship crew out there that were in the middle of the summer out in the Central Arctic. So to summarize a little bit the mission and to give you some numbers, we had 20 nations involved in funding Mosaic, and the flags for those nations are on the lower right side of the slide there. But we also had 37 nations involved in terms of the participants there. That's pretty remarkable if you ask me. 37 different nations out there working together to really understand the Arctic system. We had 7 different icebreakers or ships out there in operation, and more than 80 institutions were represented. Over 400 people actually made it out to the field, out to this ship out in the middle of the Arctic. I think that's another extraordinary number. So many new research scientists making it out into the Central Arctic. And of course, the budget was pretty high, and I think this is, 150 million euros is kind of an underestimate at this point. I think the budget's gone up well from there. So to kind of summarize our year here in the Arctic, we faced a lot of challenges out there, right? The Arctic is a challenging place to operate. In the Arctic winter, it's very extreme. The ice, of course, breaks, everything moves. But those challenges were also opportunities for us to really study the emerging Arctic system, an Arctic system that has thin sea ice, that has dynamic sea ice, and we were right there in the middle of it. We did a ton of science, and this is really important, right? We accomplished this step change in the data that we have and the understanding that we have of the Arctic system. We had very broad participation from the international community and across many different disciplines. And importantly for this meeting right here is the international cooperation was really this essential foundation that made the mission possible. We built tons of capacity, a whole new generation of trained field scientists and new concepts for how do we even conduct science in this rapidly changing Arctic. And lastly, we developed a legacy of data for the whole world to use, for stakeholders of all different flavors, scientists, policymakers, and much more. With that, I'd just like to say thank you very much. There's a lot of information about Mosaic that's available if you are interested. Please look at some web pages and do some searches online. There's a lot of great content there. And I'll thank you very much for your attention.
네, 말씀 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Please give our speaker a big hand. We heard about the Arctic cooperation in the Arctic, and we will invite one more speaker and have a Q&A session which will start shortly. So I'd like to ask our online participants to stay tuned. Don't go away. Please stay online in Zoom. We have many participants joining us online and through YouTube. And if you can post any questions you have in the chat box, please do so. We will invite one more speaker before we proceed with the Q&A offline and online. We will also take online questions as well.
역시 온라인
Let me now introduce the last speaker joining us online. We have Mr. Michael Kingston from PAIM Special Advisory, who will be talking on the topic Arctic Cooperation of International Organizations. A big round of applause, please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
네, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind invitation to speak today, and thank you to the Korean Maritime Institute, and well done to everyone in the Republic of Korea for the great work that you do on Arctic cooperation and your work with the Arctic Council. I have a legal background working on maritime regulatory issues, particularly on the implementation of the Polar Code for Shipping and the efforts to have the 2012 Cape Town Agreement for the Safety of Fishing Vessels ratified. I work as a special advisor with the Arctic Council's Protection of the Arctic Marine Environment Working Group, known as PAIM, and as an advisor on the organizing committee of the Arctic Shipping Best Practice Information Forum, that is run by PAIM, and as a consultant on polar issues and fishing vessel safety with the International Maritime Organization, helping them lead a new PAIM project with Iceland and Spain, and with the support of the Republic of Korea on raising awareness in the Arctic Council of the Cape Town Agreement. The Polar Code, the International Maritime Organization's Polar Code came into force in January 2017, and to put the achievement of the Polar Code in context, and the fact that it is brought in by way of amendments to 3 cornerstone conventions of the IMO, it is important to understand that often standalone conventions are agreed by the sensible delegations of the IMO at the Secretariat, but then not ratified by enough national governments to become binding internationally. And in other words, industry lobbyists, through politicians lacking conviction, get in the way, resulting in a failure to enact very sensible procedures for the safety of our seafarers and the protection of our environment. Some, such as the Torremolinos Convention for Fishing Boat Safety, have been on government shelves since 1977, which is why we are working so hard at present to get the latest iteration of that convention, the 2012 Cape Town Agreement for the Safety of Fishing Vessels, over the line. So when put in this context, the early implementation of the Polar Code by amending the 3 cornerstone conventions of the IMO is a marvelous achievement, and the amount of work carried out by the individuals of state delegations working with industry, including the Republic of Korea, to make the Polar Code fit for purpose should not be underestimated. Of course, just because we have regulation does not mean that we have met challenges and avail of the opportunities. There is a lot more to be done. When regulations are made and become law, they need to be understood and enforced. And so working with the insurance industry in London and with ice captains of the Arctic and ice experts and others, including liaising closely with the Republic of Korea experts at the IMO, we made a proposal to the Arctic Council that a forum for best practice information be established for education about the Polar Code and to help with implementation. We adopted a bottom-up approach, recognizing that sometimes governments and international regulators need and indeed appreciate the help of industry. And the proposal came to the attention of the diligent individuals in the Arctic Council PAIM working group. And so the forum was declared at the Arctic Council Ministerial in Fairbanks in May 2017. And this followed detailed deliberations in PAIM meetings, which were, of course, attended by Republic of Korea. The aim of the forum is to raise awareness of the Polar Code amongst all those involved in or potentially affected by Arctic marine operations, and to facilitate the exchange of information and best practices on Polar Code implementation among forum participants. And the principal product of the forum is a web portal which provides links to authoritative information that are indispensable to the effective implementation of and compliance with the Polar Code. Organized by the chapters of the Polar Code, the web portal links to information submitted by forum participants and is vetted according to agreed criteria by the Forum Steering Committee. And in addition, the web portal contains links to information provided by the administrations of the 8 Arctic states. Forum participation is open to Arctic states, permanent participants, and Arctic Council observers. And of course, the Korean Maritime Institute attend on behalf of Republic of Korea, as well as any widely recognized professional organization dedicated to improving safe and environmentally sound marine operations in the Arctic. As demonstrated, here you can see the experience in Arctic shipping of, for example, the Alaska Chadder's network have submitted or are a participant, for example. The forum meets once a year in London, but the last meeting in November was virtual just 2 weeks ago, and so was last year's, obviously, because of COVID-19. Here you can see a submission on manning and training information by the International Maritime Organization under the chapter on the Polar Code. Here you can see one regarding voyage planning by the Bering Sea Elders Group. And this slide shows that the portal is achieving its objectives with a vast increase exponentially in relation to participants using the forum, where hits are now up at around the 85,000 mark since its launch, which is extremely valuable information and shows that those who are contemplating operating in the Arctic are going to this portal for extremely important information. And the forum is constantly attracting new and important participants. Another very important issue that I'm working on is the PAIM project on raising awareness about the provisions of the Cape Town Agreement, which I am involved in leading on behalf of the International Maritime Organization in conjunction with Iceland and Spain. And the project was approved at the Arctic Council Ministerial in Reykjavik in May. Of course, the benefits of implementing the Cape Town Agreement are many and can be seen on this slide, which will be available afterwards. And this is also very important for the Republic of Korea to consider because of the obvious importance of fishing vessel safety and all the associated benefits. The amount of fishing activity in the Arctic is substantial, as we know from the important statistics of PAIM's Arctic Shipping Traffic Database. And as we can see, in order to meet challenges and avail of opportunities, statistics are critical, and huge effort has gone into the Arctic Shipping Traffic Database by the Arctic states, supported in those meetings, encouraging that project by, of course, Republic of Korea as an observer. Unfortunately, the accidents in the fishing industry are far too high. So this is the Cape Town Agreement project is an extremely important project that supports PAIM's overall work in relation to the protection of the Arctic marine environment, working closely with other working groups, and that is essential. As I have touched on the Arctic Shipping Traffic Database, I would show you some example slides, sort of information that could be gleaned from those statistics. Here you see fishing activity by vessel in Alaska's exclusive economic zone in July 2021. And this is the whole of 2021 to date. This is bulk carriers for July 2021 within the Polar Code area. And this is bulk carriers for the whole of 2021 within the Polar Code area. And this is bulk carriers for July 2021 within the Alaskan exclusive economic zone, mostly transits. And the database is available or is able to break down each category of ship and even the fuel type that is being used. So here you see the number of unique ship types in the Alaskan exclusive economic zone for January through to July 2021, almost 2,500 ships in total. So to meet challenges and opportunities, this sort of information is critical. And this is a very important project of international collaboration run by PAIM. In the time available, I've only been able to touch on some of the issues where international conventions and initiatives are involved, and I'd need a lot longer to elaborate on all the initiatives, many of which the Republic of Korea are involved, both at the IMO and at PAIN in the Arctic Council and other Arctic Council working groups, such as EPPR. PAIN deals with plastics, waste management, black carbon issues, heavy fuel oil, search and rescue, and so many other issues come to mind. And as you can see, there is a lot of work going on internationally to try and make the Arctic as safe as possible and to protect the seafarers, the environment, and the indigenous people. And it is, and I've always noted the work of Republic of Korea in many meetings, proactive work. I always see the Korean Maritime Institute representing Republic of Korea with distinction, and it is an honor for me to speak here today. Thank you very much indeed.
네, 말씀 감사합니다. 네,
Thank you very much for your presentation. So that presentation was on the Arctic cooperation of international organizations by Mr. Kingston. Thank you very much, and let us now move on to a Q&A session.
현장
And we will focus more on our guests here offline. If you have any questions, please raise your hand so that our staff can bring you a microphone. So we will first take questions from the floor from those of you here in Busan offline. And so we heard from all four speakers, and we still have the online presenters joining us via Zoom. We would like to invite a moderator for this Q&A session because we are addressing a very important topic. I would like to invite former Minister Kim Sung-jin of Oceans and Fisheries to moderate the Q&A session. We will proceed with Q&A until 3:50. Please welcome Mr. Kim with a big hand. Hello, everyone. Yes, since in the interest of time, I would like to start right away with the questions. So we heard 4 experts who gave us wonderful presentations, and I would like to use this time to invite back our presenters to raise important questions that relate to the topic of each of their presentations. So I will ask one question to each speaker. And I would like to ask the presenters to limit your answers to 5 minutes. First, Ambassador Peter Asgeirsson, Iceland's SAO ambassador. For the successful implementation of the Arctic Council 2030 strategic plan, what are the policy areas that Iceland is focusing on the most?
For the question, I think it is safe to say that the policy points that have to do with the sustainable development in the environment of the Arctic is most important to Iceland. As you may know, Iceland's economy is highly dependent on fisheries, and to us, the health of the marine environment is crucial, and we feel that the Council's work on marine-related issues is crucial. As you may know and remember that during our chairmanship, we emphasized the research of the problem of plastics and microplastics in the Arctic Ocean. Is something that we organized a conference to discuss this issue, and much research has been done on it. And for Iceland, the problem of plastics in the ocean is ongoing, and we are very interested in tackling this problem in the future. Thank you.
네, 아이스게이 일호선 의장님.
Thank you, Ambassador, for that answer. And of course, regarding the marine environment, the importance of marine environment has been once again reiterated, which was also the point raised by Mr. Michael Kingston, and you focus more on the marine plastics. Personally, I think that Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, achievement of SDGs is also very crucial. Thank you, Ambassador.
KMI
Next, I would like to pose a question to Dr. Kim Min-soo of KMI. As was mentioned in your presentation, within the Arctic Council, we do understand that there is a key need of the role of the observer. So then, in order to practically strengthen the role of the observer, what are some of the prerequisites required in the process? Please use the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a technical issue. Yes, now the mic is on. So I believe that the role of the observer is, of course, critical. And when we think about the role of the observer, we have to think about the interconnectiveness, the interconnectivity, and we also need to understand that there is that collaboration and cooperation is key. And I think that the observer states can actually be a great contributor to collaboration. And in terms of balance, there's just one point that I'd like to make. As mentioned, the role of the observer in the Arctic Council can be expanded qualitatively as well as quantitatively. So we need a balance between the two. It's not just about the number of more observer states that would actually strengthen the prominence of the Arctic Council. And it's not just about the strength and roles of the individual states itself to strengthen the role of the Arctic Council. So we need a balance in both qualitative as well as quantitative terms. And in terms of cooperation, in addition to the cooperation via Arctic Council, I think that we also need a balanced view with tailored bilateral cooperation. In other words, the 8 member states of the Arctic Council, I believe that we need some further collaboration. And as was mentioned by Mr. Michael Kingston, we have IMO and UNEP or UNEP. We also have to think about the collaboration with these international organizations, and only then can we resolve the pending issues of the Arctic. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Kim, for your answer. You've added some 2 key points to your presentation. You've mentioned about the importance of a balanced approach on the prerequisites to strengthen the role of observers. So it was about a balance in quantitative as well as qualitative terms. and also about the collaboration that's necessary between the Arctic states as well as the non-Arctic states. Thank you very much for that intervention.
이어서
And next, my question goes to Mr. Matthew Shupe, coordinator of Mosaic Project. Mosaic is a very successful case example of international cooperation, and I believe it is a very significant and meaningful precedent. I believe that in the Arctic, various nations will continue to pursue international joint research projects in the Arctic. And in relation to this, what kind of international joint research do you think is needed going forward? And what kind of efforts are needed to prepare for such an endeavor?
Well, thank you for your question. That's a great question. We certainly need a lot more research in the Central Arctic. And I think one area that we could really benefit from international collaboration is in the area of the continuity of observations, right? The Arctic system is changing so rapidly that we need to have repeated observations of that system as it continues to transition. And of course, these missions are very expensive, and so no single nation can do this by themselves. We really require this international collaboration and coordination so that we can continue to track things like the ecosystem health and how that's related to things like the decline of the sea ice. So we can continue to track and understand things like freshwater budgets or the temperature of the upper ocean and how circulation patterns are changing. And these kinds of processes continue to evolve in time. And we really need to have this kind of repeated pattern of going back into the Arctic, and especially in the wintertime, to really track wintertime changes and wintertime processes. And then lastly, I think at the scientific synthesis level, it's really important for enhanced and continued collaboration across nations. There are so many different experts in different nations across the world that can bring perspectives to the changing Arctic system. And I think it's really through leveraging these different perspectives, leveraging the different experts in these different nations. Together, can we then understand the Arctic as a whole? And I think that that's something that will help us ultimately to make major advances in our ability to understand the system, but also to improve our models that are attempting to represent the changing Arctic system as well. Thank you.
Yes. Dr. Shup, thank you very much for your answer. And we also have a question for you, Mr. Shupe. Through YouTube, we have quite many questions actually, but we will just ask you one more question. So the data or scientific facts that you acquired through the Mosaic projects, can you give us an example of what was quite unlike your initial expectations or predictions? What turned out to be a surprise finding?
That's another great question. You know, the Arctic, I think, surprised me a little bit in the way in which the ice broke. Now, of course, we expected the ice to break. We expected the ice to be thin, right? We knew that. That's the reason we were going to the Arctic. And it was even thinner than we expected. And it was even breaking more than we expected. And it challenged us almost every day. We had to move our installations on the ice. We had to adapt our strategy. And so it was just, to me, it was really remarkable how, even though we knew the Arctic was changing, it still seemed to be a few steps ahead of us with its change. And I think that really just tells us something about our current state of scientific understanding and how we really have to be continuing to go to the Arctic and continuing to have this kind of forward-looking approach to studying the Arctic system as it continues to move and adapt and change and transform itself.
Thank you very much. Once again, personally, I agree. And climate change itself goes beyond the human expectations and predictions in terms of its pace and gravity. And I think that is reflected in the presentations and the strategic plan of the Arctic Council. And it's been reiterated by you, Dr. Shupi, but that changes in the Arctic is much faster than our imagination. Thank you for that wonderful answer.
자, 다음은
My next question goes to Mr. Michael Kingston, Special Advisory to PAIM. Many do say that by 2050, we will be seeing an ice-free summer for the Arctic, because the impact of climate change is exacerbating in the Arctic. But of course, they do say that there are many economic activities that will be opening up with the facilitation of the Northern Sea Route. So with regard to the facilitation of NSR, we have the Arctic Council and IMO trying to find a way to coordinate two conflicting positions of environment protection and development. So how can they coordinate the two and achieve sustainable development goals? So are there any specific ways to achieve that? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the very interesting question. Of course, economic development and the ability to progress economic development in the Arctic is a matter, first of all, for the individual jurisdictions of the Arctic, and sometimes people get confused with the Antarctic, which is a set-aside area, whereas the Arctic is, like every other area of the world, is owned and by the coastal states, and normal rules apply. So it's very important that individual states act responsibly in relation to their area of the Arctic. And I witness those states doing that, and that is epitomized by the work of the Arctic Council working together. And in a way, it's a model of diplomacy in the fact that it invites so many observers to assist in that discussion. So climate change is happening, but the most important approach is to keep ahead of the curve and on top of all the issues. So the work we've heard Matthew talk about of international scientific collaboration is extremely important. You heard Dr. Kim talking about the importance of the role of observers in assisting Arctic states in their deliberations, and Ambassador Agerson from Iceland, who demonstrated magnificent leadership in their priorities during their Arctic Council chairmanship, talking and epitomizing the leadership that is required so that we do carry out any economic activity in the safest way possible. And I've explained today the Polar Code for shipping, which is critically important, and it's critically important that it's implemented correctly so that we prevent anything adverse happening in the Arctic, and that shipping that is using the Northern Sea Route is done in the most sustainable way possible by adhering to the rules and to best practice. And also, and I noted a very important issue for Iceland, and I reiterate it at this conference, is the Cape Town Agreement for fishing vessel safety. Not enough states have ratified it. It hasn't come into force yet because not enough states have ratified it. and fishing vessel activity is an extremely important element of activity in the Arctic, particularly as ice melts and fish stocks move. So I would encourage everyone to contribute to the instruments that we already have in place, the Polar Code for Shipping, to make it as effective as possible and to implement the Cape Town Agreement for fishing vessel safety. And that way we can achieve sustainable development in the most cautious way possible during the advancement of inevitable change in the Arctic. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for that intervention. You've mentioned that the importance of sustainable development and also about the Polar Code as well as the Cape Town Agreement to make sure that we utilize these existing institutional frameworks to guarantee the safety of the region. Thank you very much for that. So that was a Q&A session for our 4 speakers. So we've posed some specific questions tying into their presentations. And thank you very much for those sound responses. I think that we're almost done with the time allocated, but are there any questions from the floor or any questions from our YouTube participants? We did pose one question in the chat, but if there are any last burning questions, we would like to entertain them. And if not, I think we can close the Q&A session here.
This Q&A sessions. Once again, I really appreciate Paul presenters and your insightful and very deepest and meaningful presentation and additional views on your theme and the subject. Thank you very much.
네, 큰 박수 부탁드립니다. 네, 감사합니다.
Yes, a big round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you to our speakers for joining us for their presentations and Q&A, and also thank you to the moderator. We'll now take a 20-minute break to rearrange the stage and for some social distancing guidelines, and then we'll be back.
네, 잘
I hope you enjoyed the break, and now we will start session 3. We will invite experts from Korea and abroad for deeper exchange of ideas and views. Let me introduce our panel. We have a total of 5 panelists. After introducing our panelists, I'd like to hand over the microphone to the moderator. Continuing on as a moderator, we have former Minister Kim Sung-jin of Oceans and Fisheries as the moderator for this session as well, and Mr. Seo Won-sang, Director for the Department of Strategic Planning at COPRI. Next, we have the Head of General Policy Research Division of the KMI, Mr. Lee Sung-woo. And we have 3 more guests joining us online. Professor Yoo Jung-gu of Institute of Foreign Affairs and National Security. Hello. And next, we have 2 international panelists. Vice President Kirsi Latola of U-Arctic Thematic Network. Hello. Good to see you. Last but not least, Senior Research Fellow Andrea Ostagen of the FNI. Thank you for joining us. And session 3 will be concluded at 5 p.m. Korea time, and the moderator now has the floor. Welcome back. To conclude today's forum, we will now proceed with the roundtable discussions. The topic of the forum, and based on the presentations we heard, we would like to further broaden the discussions and exchange ideas in this roundtable session. As introduced, we have 5 panelists for this session. The topic of this Arctic Policy Forum, as you are well aware, is to take stock of the 25-year achievements of the Arctic Council and to look forward into the Arctic cooperation until 2030. And in order to broaden our discussions on this topic, I'd like to invite the 5 panelists to open with a short remark on specific areas of cooperation. And I give each panelist 5 minutes for your opening remarks to give us a gist of your ideas, starting with Mr. Lee Sung-woo of the KMI. If you could share your thoughts on the application of innovative technologies to the Arctic and possible cooperation. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Lee Sung-woo from the KMI. And as just mentioned, I want to discuss innovative technologies and Arctic cooperation. But before I do so, I would like to give you my comment about today's presentation and the way forward that we should take. Personally, I am a logistics expert, but 12 years ago, all of a sudden, I started research. Well, I was directed to start research on the Arctic sea route. Not that I wanted to. Anyways, I started with the research and learned that the Northern and Arctic Sea route is very important, and only with the full cooperation and participation of all those involved would open up a route for us to use. And in relation to today's topic, we heard about the peaceful cooperation during the keynote speech in session 1. Can we engage in peace cooperation? Are we engaging in peace cooperation and while managing the Arctic? Well, this question leads to various different ideas and views, and as Mr. Kim Min-soo mentioned in his presentation, along with the Arctic states, non-Arctic states, and observer states and user states, there are differences in views and approaches. How we can overcome these differences for the purpose of peaceful cooperation is, I think, very essential. Everyone talks about the Arctic. In terms of environment, the Arctic has impact of the global warming in the Arctic is 3 times that of the rest of the world. And not only observer states and Arctic states, but the entire world must take interest in the Arctic. And so the first point I want to raise is that the Arctic Council as an organization should go beyond just an intergovernmental consultative body, but a body that represents the entire international community. And to represent this, I think that the Mosaic project presented earlier is very significant. So we must all move together by engaging in scientific research. And based on that research, the data and technology will be coming out, and we can use this to develop into industries. And in this way, we can prevent any misuse or excessive use of the Arctic. Mr. Michael Kingston mentioned the ASTD and other data that should be used and shared with all for progress in industrialization. And to add a comment, for the sustainable use of the Arctic, we believe that the part of the Arctic must be protected, and certain parts of the Arctic must be used for economic purposes. But what is most needed is technological cooperation, in particular in terms of digital technologies and environmental technologies. 25 years into operation, I think that the Arctic Council took a more of an analog approach. But since 2010 or so, the Arctic Council shifted, and now in 2021, we must now shift towards a digital approach. Security and national defense and climate were the focus, and now we must focus more on the environment, protection of indigenous people, and the environment as a whole, through a digital approach that can cover all these different areas. From 5 years ago, at the Arctic Sea route and usage of digital technologies to use the Arctic Sea route to use the Arctic resources in a safe and sustainable manner, maintaining the livelihoods of indigenous people, to connect them to digital technologies. These are the areas of my research. And once we have these necessary technologies in place, I think that peaceful use as well as digital technological cooperation will be possible, and this is essential for the sustainable use of the Arctic. And to further suggest, I think to do all this, we need a joint roadmap for the technological innovation or revolution, and we must build together a technological ecosystem under a pan-global project like a Mosaic project. Korea, China, Japan, Arctic states, and any countries with well-developed digital technologies should take part in pondering on how to use the Arctic wisely and turn it into a region for everyone's use. And with that, I'd like to conclude my opening remarks. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Very concisely and to the point, you gave us a very nice overview, and you suggested building a joint technological roadmap and another pilot project like the Mosaic project. Thank you for the suggestion.
Moving on, I would like to ask Director Seo Won-sung on the role of non-Arctic states in scientific cooperation in the Arctic. Hello, everyone. I'm Seo Won-sung from COPRI. It's a great pleasure to be invited to the 10th Arctic Policy Forum, and also a great pleasure to listen to the insightful presentations and comments. Thank you once again for the invitation. So today, the topic that I was requested to talk about was Arctic scientific cooperation and non-Arctic states' role. I think that there are two key words here. One is scientific cooperation, and the other is the role of non-Arctic states. But I would like to start off my comments with that second key word. So the role of non-Arctic states. If you think about this phrase, another question comes to mind. Because when you want to engage in scientific cooperation, is the role of Arctic states and non-Arctic states different, or should it be different? That's the question that comes to mind. And in the process of finding the response to this question, I think we can go back to the fact that Arctic states and non-Arctic states, do they perceive the Arctic differently? This was something that I think we should take into account. So for a non-Arctic state, I'm pretty sure that you may think of the Arctic as both a risk as well as opportunity. So for the industries, they will be focused on the opportunities, and in the case of science, they will be probably thinking about the threats. Of course, there are eco-friendly industries, those that focus on environmental friendly practices in the science, also looking into the utilization of resources. However, at the end of the day, it's true that the first priority for the science community would be on the challenges or the threats. But if we do focus on the opportunities, then I'm sure that the Arctic states and non-Arctic states will be at a different position, because for the 8 members of the Arctic Circle, or the coastal states of the Arctic. If you look at these countries, they do have legal and geopolitical rights, and such rights must be respected. So if you're focusing on the opportunity standpoint, it ties into the rights. And of course, there's that distinction between Arctic and non-Arctic states. However, if you think of climate change with a scientific perspective, and if we think of ourselves at the face of climate change, there isn't a meaningful distinction between Arctic and the non-Arctic. The Arctic is greatly impacted by climate change, more so than other regions. So the changes to the climate or the environment in the Arctic will have a direct impact to mid-latitude countries like Korea. For instance, we're all aware of the Kara and the Barents Sea. We're seeing the changes in the sea ice sheet. We're seeing some meteorological interaction which passes the Siberia to directly impact the Korean peninsula, leading to extreme weather events. And then think about global warming. If we do see loosening of the oscillation, the cold wave in the Arctic will cover up the Korean peninsula. So I believe that this is not just about the Arctic. If you think about the overall circulation, both in air and sea, we're all interconnected. So not only Korea, but many countries are engaging in scientific research, whether you're an Arctic state or a non-Arctic state. But observation and analysis of the environment is not something that can be done by just a handful of countries. And even if it is possible, it's true that it would be very inefficient for one country to carry or perform this role. There's a lot of infrastructure, human resources, and efforts that are necessary in the process. And that is why we believe that collaboration is key. So in order to counter the threats to humanity, it's not about Arctic or non-Arctic. We need to stage a mutual and a reciprocal standpoint in resolving the challenges. In the fact that Korea has a status in the Antarctic Treaty, and also the fact that we have observer status in the Arctic Council, indicates the achievements of Korea's scientific community and also the trust that was built in the process. And not only that, in 2013, ever since Korea became an observer state of the Arctic Council, we continued on with our scientific collaboration and has strengthened the trust that was already built. We always say that science diplomacy, science itself would be the first step towards people-to-people exchange and diplomacy, or public diplomacy. There are a lot of systems as well as infrastructure to motivate scientific cooperation. Canada, US, Norway, Greenland, and Russia. You can see that there are ground-based observation posts, and in the air we do have the satellites that are looking into the cryosphere of any changes. And as was emphasized in 2017, the next generation research icebreaker will be constructed to observe the Arctic, and we believe that in the summer of 2030 or so, this icebreaker will be able to observe the Arctic Pole, and in the summer, spring, and fall seasons, we will be able to look into the geological, the ecological, as well as the atmospheric investigations or explorations by utilizing these facilities. So Korea will be continuing on to expand its capabilities in air as well as in the waters. So I believe that Korea will be cooperating with various countries to engage in Arctic collaboration going forward. And with regard to the next generation research icebreaker, if you do want more information, tomorrow there is a Arctic scientific seminar, so please come to that event for some more information. Yes, Dr. Sewon-sang, thank you very much for your contribution. You've mentioned that when it comes to scientific collaboration in the Arctic, you've mentioned that there is no distinction between Arctic states and non-Arctic states. because we are on equal footing and we need to engage in some mutual cooperation to resolve the many issues. So thank you very much for that comment. Let me move on.
Ratola.
Ms. Kirsi Latola, Vice President of the Thematic Networks of the EU-Arctic. First of all, congratulations on the 20th anniversary of EU-Arctic.
Thank you.
My and
The EU-Arctic and Korea have successfully operated the Arctic Academy since 2015. Based on this achievement, where can we cooperate further?
So first, thank you for the invitation. I can hear echo now for some reason. So thank you for the invitation to join this seminar, and apologies for not taking part earlier in the morning because I'm based in Finland and it's early morning in my hours. So as noted, EU-Arctic celebrates its 20th anniversary this year. We were endorsed and established by the Arctic Council initiative, and one of our main pillars is, of course, peaceful cooperation that was mentioned earlier right now. And EU-Arctic has, of course, grown a lot during those 20 years, and one of the things that has been included is also the non-Arctic states as EU-Arctic members. Initially, it was only based on Arctic nations. And what is the EU-Arctic vision is still the same. We want to bring the education and knowledge to the Northerns. We want to create a strong, engaged, informed, and dynamic North, creating better lives and environments for all the Northerners. And we feel that we can create that stronger North by educating the people and giving the equal opportunities regardless of where you are. But we also need to educate the southern regions to understand the Arctic, its peoples, and to show that there's a lot of competence, understanding, and more importantly, a knowledge which is over 1,000 years old as well. And this, of course, means indigenous knowledge and local knowledge. We also know that there are over 10 million people in the Arctic. It's only indigenous, but it's also non-indigenous peoples. We all call Arctic as our home. So if you think about the battle in the climate change and other problems, it has, of course, become more clear that we need to utilize all the knowledge system. We mean in the science, indigenous, and local knowledge. And we, of course, need to increase the cooperation in all levels. And in my view, one of the biggest tasks in education in the future is to bring all these knowledge systems together into education and, of course, into research. And one of the things that Korean Arctic Academy has been doing is to educate both the Koreans to understand the Arctic, its peoples, its climate systems and everything, and also, of course, to educate the Koreans about the other way around. But they of course have a lot of challenges in the Arctic. Connectivity being one, as already mentioned about the technologies and building a roadmap on the technologies. There are a lot of remote areas where we have youth who would like to have an education, but they can't do that either physically or even either virtually because there are no connections. And this is, of course, an issue that has been also recognized by Arctic Council, by EU-Arctic, by Arctic Economic Council as well. It has formed several task forces on that. And within EU-Arctic, we also have one of thematic networks working on remote telecommunications. So we work in partnerships, and we want to work more with partnerships, of course, with all our nation, all our regions, all the other Arctic organizations, as well as Arctic Council members. By being Arctic Council observers, we of course have a close link to all the Arctic Council working groups. We follow our values, which are circumpolar, inclusive, respectful, collaborative, open, and influential. And I think that one of the tools that we work in reaching these values and bringing the education, knowledge, and understanding to the north, and also about the north to the southern, is of course our thematic networks and all these educational activities such as Korean Arctic Academy. Thank you.
네. question.
Yes, thank you, Vice President Atola. And again, congratulations on the 20th anniversary of UArctic. And the achievements so far, systems of knowledge that need to be integrated, building technology roadmap, lack of connections, expanding partnerships. These are some of the remaining tasks that UArctic and Korea must together tackle. And I think this is a very promising task that we have before us. Thank you very much.
Andreas.
Next, I would like to ask a question to Dr. Andreas Westhagen. Dr. Westhagen is very well known for his expertise on Arctic governance. So I would like to ask, where should the Arctic Council focus on to stabilize Arctic governance in the future? What kind of role should the Arctic Council play in this endeavor going forward? So, Dr. Westhagen, any insights, please?
Good morning. Thank you very much for that question and for the invitation to participate, at least virtually. And thank you for the question. Like Kirsi, I'm also early in the morning here in Norway. As you can see, I'm on the beach, or not so much, but it's better than the background of my office. I must also say that I very much wish that I could have been there in Busan. I was there for the partnership week 2 years ago, and it was a great conference. So I hope to return one day to Busan. Honorable Chair, thank you for that question. I think I'll try to answer or give my opening remarks along a couple of lines. We at the Fridtjof Nansen Institute here in Oslo, we've researched on the geopolitics and security dynamics of the Arctic, also looking at that governance more broadly and the ocean, which I'll get back to at the end. But if we try to disentangle a bit the question or the concerns that have emerged in the Arctic over the last decade, if we look at traditional security concerns, military security concerns, if you will, we have seen an increase in tension over the last years, the last decade, but especially the last couple of years, which relates to an increase in tension between Russia and NATO more at large. Especially here in Norway, we see this in the form of say, bellicose statements or rhetoric coming from both Western and the Russia leaders. We also see an increase in military activity along the Norwegian coast and in the Barents Sea, the Norwegian Sea, both from a NATO and a Russia side. And the thing with this increase in military activity in the European parts of the Arctic is that it does not originate because of an issue in the Arctic itself, right? There is not any real territorial dispute or maritime boundary to dispute in the Arctic. There's a few issues in the Arctic that cause a bit of concern, but there's no issues in the Arctic that really cause increased military engagement. Instead, we're seeing that a lot of this military activity in the north derives from tension coming from elsewhere. So right now, the tension between NATO and Russia in Ukraine, and before that also linked to Belarus, that has a spillover effect into the Arctic because of the Arctic's increasingly strategic importance, and also because of Russia's prominent position with its strategic forces located in the northwestern parts of the Russian part of the Arctic. And this is important, right? Because it means that although there is increased tension in the north, it does not necessarily mean that it will lead to an outright conflict. So how do we solve this issue, right? Your question concerns the Arctic Council. And I would argue, and I think many experts that look at the Arctic Council would argue the same, that the Arctic Council is not the best tool to deal with security issues, right? The fact that the Arctic Council does not do that, and that was stated when it was founded in 1996, is one of the reasons for its success, right? To keep cooperation on softer issues away from the security issues is one of the reasons why the Arctic Council has continued to function as it does, despite tensions elsewhere. So I think that's an important point to further along. But with that also comes the question, what then for security issues in the Arctic? And there are a lot of talks now. This is the main discussion point amongst those who look at geopolitics and security in the north. And it's the question of how can we decrease tension, and how can we perhaps establish other forms of cooperation in the Arctic also on security issues. Could we perhaps revive the Northern Chiefs or the Arctic Chiefs of Defense Forum, where that was disbanded after 2014? That's one option. Or are there other informal ways to increase security talks also in the Arctic? Because it is needed with the increase in military activity and also sometimes aggressive rhetoric coming from different Arctic actors. So that's on the one side. But looking more broadly at the Arctic Council and governance and cooperation, we also focus quite a bit here at the Fridtjof Nansen Institute, together also with the Korea Maritime Institute, in fact, on ocean governance more broadly. And here, the Arctic states have a lot going on already in terms of dealing with everything from moving fish stocks to search and rescue, Coast Guard affairs, or oil spill prevention, emergency response, those type of issues. That all links to how activity is increasing in the oceans, or how we could better govern the oceans. And here the Arctic Council is doing some work, but I think there's even room to expand further. And I think we will probably see more of that, right now during the Russian chairmanship of the Arctic Council, but also perhaps going into the Norwegian chairmanship of the Arctic Council, which will start in a year and a half from now. I think the ocean will be in the focus. And that also links, and I'm finishing up, but that also links to what the previous speaker or before highlighted in terms of the Arctic and non-Arctic actors. And the fact that when you look to ocean governance in the north, especially discussions about marine protected areas, the use or the protection of say, Arctic governance, the fishery agreement that was signed in the areas beyond national jurisdiction, or the BBNJ, the biodiversity negotiations that are ongoing under the UN. In all of these matters, say non-Arctic states, China, Korea, Japan, also the EU, not being a state, but still an important non-Arctic actor in many ways, are heavily engaged and very important. And I think this is an interesting avenue to explore further, ocean governance more at large, and how not only ocean governance is important to better preserve the resources in the north or to better cooperate on ocean issues, but also the fact that cooperating on ocean governance might also have a positive effect on the security relations that I talked about in the beginning. I think I'll leave it at that, but I'm looking forward to your questions, and thank you again for inviting me to this great conference.
네, 감사합니다.
Yes, thank you very much. You've mentioned about the very complex intertwined Arctic governance. Thank you very much for that very succinct and summarized response. You've particularly mentioned that security, with regard to security, we're seeing tensions rising, but that it's not that risky. In other words, the various cooperation based on ocean governance will definitely be of assistance in solving these security issues as well, and also enable Arctic and non-Arctic states to collaborate further to resolve the issues. And you've mentioned that this will help strengthen Arctic governance going forward. And I think that we can also delve into this topic afterwards in the second round of Q&As. Thank you very much.
문제 맞.
And last but not least, our final panelist, Professor Yoo Jun-gu. How can Korea, more narrowly, contribute to the 2030 strategic plan of the Arctic Council? Hello, I am Yoo Jung-gu of IFANS KNDA. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to this meaningful event. And early December, this event is always held over a period of a week, and I am always reminded of the APW around this time of year. So the question, how Korea can contribute to the strategic plan of the Arctic Council going towards 2030? Well, as we prepare to join the Arctic Council, we thought of what we can contribute to the Arctic Council and the Arctic in general. This was what we contemplated on about 10 years ago. And during the past decade, not only to the Arctic Council, but in the Arctic activities in general by Korea, I think that there have been much progress. To compare the two, different times, there are maybe some different wordings, but comprehensive issues and a very converged work, and also at the same time specific projects and international cooperation agenda have been presented and developed. And in the process, of course, about 10 years ago, there were these legacy issues that we thought of to be important areas of the Arctic Council that Korea could contribute to, and this remains the same today. For the development of the Arctic and for the general agenda for the Arctic, namely cooperation and solidarity with the indigenous people, climate change, sustainable development, and with all Arctic states, we can engage in bilateral diplomacy or having a multilateral platform to expand our diplomatic horizon. And in this sector, Korea recently also, very importantly, focused on the scientific strategic diplomacy, where expanding diplomatic horizon in the Arctic is directly related with great implications. And for the sustainable development of the Arctic, of course, in the past, resources, logistics, energy, the Arctic sea routes remain important topics, but very individual cooperative projects are very specifically and in a converged manner proceeded. And lastly, for capacity building, in my view, just like any other global issue, capacity building by capacity sharing is key. For Arctic states and with the Arctic Council, there are areas where Korea can do best. Specific areas such as ICT, for example, can be used by Korea to work with the Arctic Council states and Arctic states in general to share Korea's capacity. And to do this, of course, domestic capacity building has been done to a great degree in Korea. We also generated a pool of new experts and talents, building networks. And this will continue into the future to expand cooperation. So in conclusion, Korea's contribution to the Arctic Council is based on the principle of inclusiveness, coherence, and consistency. And with these principles, I think Korea can contribute to the strategic plan of the Arctic Council. Yes. Thank you very much, Professor Yu, for the kind words. You considered the scientific diplomacy and energy, resources, logistics, other cooperative areas were pointed out as some of the areas of progress made, and you also pointed out the importance of capacity building and presented the 3 principles for Korea's cooperation with the Arctic Council. Thank you very much. And now, in addition, for our online panelists who are joining us very early in the morning, I just have a very short question to each of you. First, to Ms. Latola.
질문을 드리겠습니다. 유아틱 차원에서
So, at UArctic, are there any joint research projects underway with non-Arctic states? It would be great if you can give us a couple of examples, 1 or 2 examples of any joint research underway with non-Arctic states. And also, in the future, what kind of joint research do you think is necessary to be conducted with Korea?
Thank you for the question. In UArctic, we have a tool, a platform called Thematic Network, which means that those are groups of UArctic members and other members who work together. And within those 61 thematic networks, we have over 300 different member organizations, also a lot from outside the Arctic 8 countries. So there's a lot of cooperation going on with non-Arctic nations. We have an Asian universities. We have one thematic network led by the Harbin Institute in China, and we have Japanese who are members in thematic network. So there's a lot of research going on. In all those 61 thematic networks, they of course work in different teams. Some of the teams are very focused on climate action. Some are very focused on, for example, teacher education. Some are focused on culture, some are focused on indigenous issues. So the topics are huge, broad diversity overall. And also, of course, the networks are very different. And from the top of my head, one of the things that I already mentioned was the telecommunications and networking, which is, of course, one of the very important issues if you think about the connectivity within the rural regions and within the Arctic, because that links to so many things. It links to healthcare, in education, in everything. That's of course one thing. We do have a network that works with AMAP on persistent organic pollutants, POPs, and other contaminants within the Russia and China and in Eastern Asia, which is a very good example of the research that is going on also with the local and indigenous communities within that area. So that's one of the good examples. And there's a lot of research going on, of course, in North America, across the Europe, and across the Russia as well. If I think about the Korea and what kind of a cooperation would be needed or research cooperation is needed, I think it should be something that, of course, adds on, and you should bring your own expertise and your own knowledge and the research where you are strong into the thematic networks, for example. And with that, of course, you can always turn to me and I can link you with those different 61 thematic networks. It's not easy to think about with my morning brain of any particular topic that you should increase, because there are so many, it's so diverse, it's so huge. But I'm sure that there are some.
네,
Thank you.
감사합니다.
Yes, thank you very much. I know it's very early in the morning. Thank you so much for sharing with us some examples of joint research and also on the possibilities of conducting joint research with Korea. And you've mentioned that it's important to start off with knowledge and expertise of Korea, and that in the future we can continue to have this dialogue to see what kind of joint projects can be possible with the thematic networks. And personally, the first thought that comes to my mind is that in terms of connectivity and the telecommunications network, well, for Korea, in Korea, it's very well renowned for its connectivity, prowess, its expertise and capabilities in telecommunication networks. So because we do have world advanced technology in that aspect, I think that we can take the time to engage in some further dialogue to see what kinds of contributions we can make together. So once again, thank you for that, and thank you very much for your response.
And last but not least, to Mr. Westhagen. You mentioned the Arctic governance very elaborately. And in relation to that, regarding the stability of the Arctic governance, do you foresee any risks?
For that question. That's a complex one, right? Because as you said yourself, Chair, that the Arctic governance system is a rather complex one, right? So there's multiple risks. I think I mentioned some of the risks already. I think the risk that tensions between Russia and NATO, or Russia and the West, or because of issues in other parts of the world, whether it's Ukraine or Syria or elsewhere, spilling over into the Arctic, making Arctic cooperation even more difficult. I think that's a serious risk. Even that, so far we've seen that the Arctic Council has been sheltered, also by negative relations between Russia and NATO. But that's not a given. That's not a law of nature, right? That's something that could change in the future if tensions were to grow even further, or if you have, say, a government in Kremlin in Moscow, or in the White House in Washington, D.C., that would be keen on using the Arctic as an arena for symbolic gestures to heighten tension even further. And I think we saw also some of that during the Trump administration, with how the Trump administration focused on China in the Arctic, and started using rather aggressive rhetoric versus China in the Arctic, without really pointing to anything that China had done specifically. So it seemed more that because of the global competition between the United States and China, the Arctic was being used as an arena for that competition. And I think that's a serious risk, and probably what I see as the primary risk that the Arctic states need to deal with and think very seriously about. But then you have other small scale risks, and if we link to ocean governance, as I already talked about earlier, I think climate change and the fact that a lot of fish stocks or marine living resources are changing their geographical patterns of distribution because of climate change. That is a risk as well. It's a risk to governance, to cooperation. We've seen in the Norwegian Sea and the North Sea that mackerel, or the cooperation on mackerel stocks and on herring stocks have not been very successful because of climate change and because of the pressures that have put on governance structures. Perhaps we could envision something similar happening in the Barents Sea on the cod collaboration between Norway and Russia, or in other parts of the Arctic as well. So I think, the risks are along many axes, but I think that they're manageable, right? But it needs active engagement and focus. It doesn't. I think this idea that the Arctic should just be left to itself and that it will continue just to be harmony and cooperation in the Arctic nonetheless, I think that's something we need to dispel with, and actually we need to work on ensuring that Arctic cooperation is maintained going forward.
예,
Yes. That was not an easy question, but You gave us a very specific answer. Once again, thank you for that.
추가적인 질문
Oh, well, I did have some questions for our domestic participants as well, but unfortunately, I think we used up all of the time allotted. So for our speakers from Korea, I will try to have those questions asked. I'll take them offline and to make sure that it's included in the report of the Arctic Policy Forum. So I think now it's time to wrap up today's panel discussion. This year, that marks the 25th anniversary of the Arctic Council, is also quite meaningful for Korea as well. As was mentioned in the opening ceremony yesterday, and also as noted in the presentations from the speakers today at this forum, the plan to build the next generation research icebreaker has been finalized, and we've also seen the establishment of the Polar Activities Promotion Act. And above all, for sustainable development and to resolve the pending issues of the Arctic, Korea has established the 2050 Arctic Activities Strategy as well. And against this backdrop, I believe that today's Arctic Policy Forum has given us a very good opportunity to share different views and insights. And I do believe that today's event carries significant meaning in that respect. The various discussions and the suggestions at this Arctic Policy Forum, I believe, will be serving at the core to strengthen the role of the Arctic Council and also forge further Arctic collaboration in the future. Once again, I would like to extend my gratitude to all of our participants, and particularly our speakers from Europe. It's very early in the morning, but despite the time difference, thank you so much for joining us in the panel discussion. And also all speakers, panelists, thank you very much. And all of those joining us online, I would like to express my appreciation to all of you for being with us till the very end. And last but not least, I would like to express my gratitude to Acting President of KMI for his support, and also for all of the staff and all of those involved in making the event possible. We have many from the Secretariat that has supported us in this endeavor to put together this event, and thank you very much. And with this, we would like to close the 2021 Arctic Policy Forum, and let us all call it a day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, former Minister, and I would like to thank all panelists. This was quite a long international forum that took place for 4 hours, and thank you very much, all participants, for joining us for all those 4 hours.